The courtroom cameras were rolling when the lawyer smirked. Slow, deliberate, absolutely certain he was untouchable. Judge Judy didn't interrupt. She didn't raise her voice. She simply picked up a thin contract and turned one single page. The smile faded instantly from his face. The entire gallery leaned forward in their seats. Because buried deep in his own words was a clause he'd completely forgotten about. A clause that was about to obliterate his entire case, destroy his credibility, and end his career right there on that bench in front of everyone. Judge Judy's eyes locked onto his as she began to read it aloud. And what came next would haunt this lawyer for the rest of his professional life. But before we get into it, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and hit subscribe for more shocking courtroom moments. The moment Judge Judy turned that single page, the air in the courtroom changed. His smirk did not just fade, it evaporated, wiped clean as if the truth itself reached out and erased it, and the cameras captured every heartbeat of his unraveling. The page hung between them like a blade, thin, ordinary, unthreatening, until you realized what lived on it. The contract he drafted, the one he weaponized, the one he swore would crush the plaintiff's case, now trembled slightly in Judy's hand. Not from her nerves, from the weight of what she was about to release into the room. The camera drifted in, catching a close-up of his fingers tightening around his pen. One tap, two taps, a rhythm of arrogance trying to find its footing. He straightened his tie in a motion meant to seem casual, but nothing about him looked casual anymore. Not when Judy's eyes narrowed, scanning the lines he never expected her to question. Across the room, the plaintiff, a soft-spoken woman in her late 30s, watched with shoulders drawn inward, as if bracing for either salvation or disaster. She had walked into this courtroom terrified. But now, with Judy holding the page like evidence carved from stone, something flickered in her gaze. Not confidence, not yet, but possibility. Judge Judy flipped the page back toward him, slow and deliberate. "Mr. Ralston," she said, her voice measured, almost gentle, the kind of tone that warned storms were forming. "Did you read this clause before you inserted it into the final draft?" He gave a sharp laugh, shallow, defensive. "Your Honor, I wrote the clause. Of course I read it." Judy raised a brow. "Yes, you did write it. That is the problem." A murmur rippled through the gallery, the hush of people sensing blood in clear water. Judy leaned forward slightly, as if examining a fragile truth under a microscope. The lighting above her bench cast a harsh stripe across the contract, illuminating a paragraph buried deep inside, a paragraph he had hoped no one would look too closely at. "This clause," she continued, tapping the page once, "states that the plaintiff waives her right to contest any amendments made after the signing date. Is that correct?" He nodded quickly, too quickly. "And yet," she said, turning the page so the cameras captured it clearly, "it appears in a font size inconsistent with the rest of the document, almost as if it was added later." The tap of his pen stopped. Completely. His throat bobbed. The plaintiff's breath caught. Even the court reporter paused mid-keystroke. Judy set the contract down with a soft, devastating finality. "Before we continue, Mr. Ralston, I want you to answer one simple question." She lifted her eyes, slow, piercing, unblinking. "Why," she asked, "is your signature dated before this clause existed?" The room froze, and in that stillness, in that single suspended second, he realized there was no version of the truth that could save him now. Because Judy already knew the answer. She just wanted to hear how he planned to lie about it. His smile returned, thinner now, strained at the edges, but still there, like a mask glued on by pride. He tapped his pen again, faster this time, trying to resurrect the confidence that had just been ripped from him. But the courtroom could already smell the fear beneath the arrogance. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above as the lawyer straightened in his chair, forcing himself into a posture meant to signal control. He crossed one leg over the other, adjusted his cufflinks, and let out a slow exhale that bordered on theatrical. Cameras tracked him as he attempted to reconstruct his persona, the calm professional, the expert negotiator, the man who never loses. "Your Honor," he began, lifting his chin as though addressing a subordinate rather than a judge. "This is a standard clause. Any inconsistencies are purely clerical." Judy did not blink. "Clerical?" she repeated, the word floating in the air like something toxic. "You expect me to believe a clerical inconsistency changed the fundamental meaning of a binding agreement?" He gave a shrug that tried to look casual, but the stiffness in his shoulders betrayed him. "In my experience, lay people simply misunderstand the fine print. It happens." A low sound swept across the gallery, a blend of disbelief and disgust. The plaintiff looked down at her hands, her knuckles pale from how tightly she held them together. His words stung because they were familiar. That was exactly how he had spoken to her when he believed she had nowhere else to turn. Judge Judy leaned back, eyes narrowing in quiet study. "Is that how you view your clients, Mr. Ralston? As lay people who misunderstand what you choose to hide from them?" He hesitated, then smirked. The wrong move. "I view my clients," he said, "as individuals who rely on my expertise. And sometimes that expertise requires decisions they may not fully grasp." Judy's gaze sharpened. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Decisions," she repeated softly. "Such as inserting clauses that were never negotiated? Or altering timelines without informing the signing party?" He opened his mouth to respond, but she raised a single finger. Silence. Immediate. Absolute. The courtroom held its breath. "Mr. Ralston," she continued, picking up the contract with a precise, almost surgical touch, "you did not merely add a clause. You structured it in a way that concealed it. That is not expertise. That is intent." His pen slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the desk. The sound echoed like a confession. The plaintiff closed her eyes for a moment, a tremor of relief passing through her. For the first time, the imbalance of power between them seemed to shift, just slightly, but unmistakably. Judy adjusted her glasses, scanning the page again. Then her hand paused over a faint handwritten scribble near the margin, a note so small it nearly blended into the paper's grain. Her expression changed. Slowly, she lifted the contract toward the light, the inked words catching a sharp gleam. "Mr. Ralston," she said, voice turning cold, "care to explain this handwritten note?" The color drained from his face, because he recognized the handwriting instantly. It was his. The ink shimmered faintly under the courtroom lights, a tiny handwritten scrawl that did not belong in a finalized contract. Judy held the page higher, the note catching the camera's focus like a dropped match in dry grass. And the lawyer's reaction, the stillness, the swallowed breath, confirmed everything before he said a single word. The note was barely half a sentence, tucked into the margin as though he hoped it would be lost in the white space. "If she resists, enforce 9B aggressively." Not typed, not initialed, not disclosed. A seed of intent, scribbled in haste and arrogance. The plaintiff's eyes widened as she leaned forward, reading the words that had dictated months of fear. Her hands trembled, not with weakness but with recognition. This was the tone he used in every meeting, the threat behind every polite smile. Judy lowered the page slowly, like lowering evidence in a criminal trial. "Mr. Ralston," she said, her voice steady, "this note is not a clerical error. It is instruction." He immediately rose a little too fast, knocking his knee against the table. "Your Honor, that is just a preliminary thought, something written during early drafting. It has no bearing on the final version." "Then why," Judy said, tilting her head, "does it appear on a printed page dated after the contract was executed?" The murmurs began again, a tidal shift of judgment moving across the gallery. His jaw tightened. "It was a reminder to myself, nothing more." A reminder to enforce a clause she never agreed to? He blinked, once, twice, his composure fraying with each breath. The camera cut to the plaintiff. Her expression had changed, no longer afraid, but resolute. For the first time she was not imagining injustice. She was seeing it written in his own hand. Judy turned her attention to the note again, the courtroom lights casting a halo around the page. You wrote this with the intention of leveraging pressure, did you not? No, that's not. He paused, searching for a lie sturdy enough to climb out of the hole he'd dug. None came. It was hypothetical. Judy nodded slowly. Hypothetical, she echoed, as if tasting the word. Interesting. Because the plaintiff provided documents indicating you referenced Clause 9b multiple times when she questioned the terms. His face paled. The plaintiff swallowed hard. He told me I was lucky he let me sign it all. A hush fell across the courtroom. Judy shifted her gaze to the bailiff. Bring me the envelope submitted earlier. The bailiff moved with calm precision, retrieving a thick manila envelope sealed with a bright red evidence tag. Judy accepted it and opened it with a deliberate tear that echoed like a warning. Inside were printed emails, highlighted in yellow. He recognized them instantly. Judy lifted the first email, her eyes scanning the text before she looked up at him with chilling clarity. Mr. Ralston, she said softly, would you like to explain why these messages contradict every word you have said today? The room froze. Because everyone could already see it, the lies were catching up. The paper slid from the envelope with a whisper sharp enough to cut the room in half. Judy held the first email between two fingers, her expression unreadable, her eyes fixed on the lawyer, and he froze, because even from a distance he recognized the subject line. The gallery leaned forward as the fluorescent lights reflected off the glossy printed page. The courtroom felt smaller now, as if the walls themselves had drawn closer to listen. Judy began to read, her voice steady and cool. You need to sign today, she recited. If you delay, the terms will become less favorable. The plaintiff's breath hitched. She had replayed those words in her mind for months, believing she had misunderstood, that maybe she had been overreacting. But hearing them spoken aloud by Judge Judy, with the exact emphasis he used in those emails, made the memory real in a way it had never been before. The lawyer's throat tightened. Your Honor, those were standard negotiation statements. Judy lifted a hand. Silence. It was not just authority, it was condemnation wrapped in composure. Standard, she said. Then why does this next line read? She lowered the page slightly. She will fold if pressured. Use Clause 9b if needed. The gallery gasped. Even the bailiff's eyebrows twitched. The lawyer's jaw twitched as he reached for the email, desperate to regain some sense of control. Your Honor, you are taking that out of context? I assure you, Judy said, sliding the paper away from his grasp, I am reading it in exactly the context you wrote it. She set the email on her bench and picked up the next one. This time, she did not read it immediately, she studied it. The pause was deliberate, surgical, a silence carved carefully to expose truth. Mr. Ralston, she finally said, this email is dated 2 days after the contract was signed, and yet you instruct your associate to prepare the revised document for enforcement. Tell me, what document were you revising? He blinked rapidly, his composure crumbling. That must be a misunderstanding. The dates may have been mismatched. Or, Judy said softly, the document was altered after the signing date, which, for the record, is exactly what the plaintiff alleged. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. The rhythm of his arrogance, the tapping pen, the smirking confidence, had vanished entirely. Now his hands gripped the table, as if it were the only thing keeping him from collapsing. The plaintiff watched him tightly, her fingers curled around her skirt. She did not smile. This was not victory yet. But something inside her finally loosened, the weight of self-doubt slipping free as the truth took shape. Judy stacked the emails neatly, aligning the edges with meticulous precision. Then she looked at him, eyes sharp as a blade. These messages, she said, do not merely contradict your testimony. They reveal intent, coordinated pressure, and a deliberate attempt to enforce a clause that should not exist. She leaned forward, her voice dropping into a tone that made the room go still. Mr. Ralston, were you aware this contract exists in 2 different versions? The lawyer's blood ran cold, because Judy was not asking out of curiosity. She already had both versions, and only one of them could save him. The other would end him. Judge Judy laid the two contracts side by side, the pages aligning like mirrored versions of a truth he never intended anyone to compare. Even from the gallery, the differences stood out like bruises. And the lawyer. He looked like a man realizing the ground beneath him was not solid after all. The contrast between the documents was immediate. The original contract, crisp, clean, unaltered, sat calmly on the left. The revised version, his version, trembled slightly under the courtroom's air conditioning. Judy placed one hand on each, the gesture almost ceremonial, like a judge weighing two sides of a scale everyone already knew was imbalanced. "Mr. Ralston," she said, her voice cutting through the silence with clinical sharpness, "I want you to explain why these two documents, both labeled as the final agreement, are not identical." His throat bobbed again. "There must have been a formatting error." "A formatting error," Judy repeated, "that added an entire clause and changed 4 terms. The gallery murmured, the tension growing denser with every passing second. The plaintiff tightened her grip on the edge of her table, her eyes tracing the differences she had never been shown. Judy slid the altered contract toward him. "I want you to read Clause 9b aloud, please." He lifted the page with trembling fingers. The confidence he once wore like armor had started to peel away, leaving something raw and exposed underneath. "This clause," he began, voice unsteady, "states that the plaintiff consents to post-signature modifications, which," Judy interjected, "appears nowhere in the original contract." He blinked down at the pages again, as if hoping the clause would magically vanish. It did not. Judy leaned back, folding her hands. "You said earlier that the clause was standard, that the plaintiff misunderstood. But the truth is simpler. The clause did not exist when she signed." The plaintiff exhaled shakily, the truth settling into her like a weight finally pushed off her chest. She had spent months doubting herself, wondering if she was naive. But here, under bright courtroom lights, her memory proved stronger than his deception. Desperation flickered across the lawyer's face. "Your Honor, I can explain." "You will have the opportunity," Judy said, lifting a finger to silence him. "But right now, we are examining evidence, not excuses." She tapped the two contracts lightly, the sound like a slow heartbeat echoing in the stillness. "Look carefully. The margins differ. Paragraph spacing differs. Even the font size changes in the section containing Clause 9b. The camera zoomed in on his shaking hand as he traced the altered text. Judy's voice softened, but not in kindness, in finality. "You did not copy-paste incorrectly. You did not misformat. You amended a contract after it was signed and attempted to enforce the altered version. That is not oversight. That is misconduct." His face drained of color. The plaintiff's eyes shimmered, not with triumph, but with long-delayed validation. Judy lifted the original contract, holding it up like a standard that would not bend. "One more question, Mr. Ralston." She pointed to a blank space near the bottom margin. "Can you explain," she asked quietly, "why the space where Clause 9b should appear in this version is completely empty?" The lawyer's lips parted, but no answer came, and that silence was louder than any lie. Judge Judy tapped the original contract with one precise finger, the nail clicking softly against paper like a countdown. "Show me," she said, "where Clause 9b appears in this version." The lawyer's eyes darted across the page, searching for a ghost. The silence that followed was thick enough to taste. He flipped through the contract once, then again. Each turn of the page grew sharper, more frantic, until the sound of rustling paper filled the courtroom like static, but Clause 9b was nowhere. The plaintiff watched him with wide, stunned eyes. She had always suspected something was wrong, but seeing him hunt for a clause that did not exist, watching him fail to find it, brought a trembling kind of clarity. She wasn't imagining deception. She had been swimming in it. Judy leaned back in her chair, observing him the way a surgeon watches a failing heartbeat on a monitor. Calm, focused, knowing exactly what came next. "Mr. Ralston," she said, her voice almost gentle, You inserted a clause into an altered document, a clause you then attempted to enforce against your own client. He straightened, grasping at whatever scrap of arrogance he had left. Your Honor, this is absurd. The plaintiff agreed to all terms. She signed this. Judy held up the original contract like a shield forged from truth. Not the version you manufactured after the fact. The camera zoomed in on his face, capturing the moment his confidence cracked. His lips parted, but his answer broke apart before it could form. Behind him, a spectator coughed. The only sound in a room packed with people suddenly afraid to breathe. Judy shifted her attention to the plaintiff. When he presented the contract to you, did he ever mention amendments, modifications, an additional clause? The plaintiff shook her head slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. No, Your Honor. He said everything was standard. He told me I didn't need to read every section. A stiff exhale rippled through the gallery. Even the bailiff's jaw clenched. Judy's eyes hardened. And you believed him? The plaintiff nodded. I trusted him. I thought he was helping me. Judy turned her gaze back to the lawyer. Sharp, unwavering, final. Do you understand what that means, Mr. Ralston? You exploited a client who trusted you. You buried terms she never agreed to, and you attempted to weaponize them when she resisted. His hands trembled. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. He shook his head weakly. You're twisting this. No, Judy said, voice a cold blade. I'm revealing it. The lawyer swallowed hard. For the first time, his arrogance wasn't cracking. It was collapsing. Judy lowered the original contract onto the bench, aligning its edges with quiet precision. One simple question, Mr. Ralston, she said softly, and you will answer it clearly. She leaned forward. Were you planning to enforce a clause you knew she never agreed to? The room tightened around him, waiting. He opened his mouth, but the words refused to come, and in that suffocating silence, the truth finally began to surface. Whether he spoke it or not, if you were sitting in that courtroom, would you speak up or stay silent when someone abuses their power? His mouth opened, but nothing came out, just a thin breath that trembled in the space between guilt and denial. The courtroom watched him with the stillness of a jury waiting for a confession, and for the first time since the hearing began, the lawyer looked small. Judy did not move. She did not push, did not repeat her question. She let the silence mature, heavy, suffocating, the kind that forces truth out of cracks arrogance can no longer fill. The lawyer finally gathered enough air to speak. Your Honor, I believed the clause was beneficial for both parties. Judy's eyebrow lifted, a surgical strike of skepticism. Beneficial? She echoed. For her? Or for you? His face tightened. The veneer of confidence, the practiced smile, the polished gestures had evaporated. What remained was a man scrambling for footing on a slope he had greased himself. He straightened his papers, then straightened them again, then realized his hands were shaking too visibly to continue the charade. Your Honor, he tried again. I have served clients for 15 years. I have never acted with malicious intent. Intent is not measured by years, Judy said calmly. It is measured by actions. And your actions read like a manual on client exploitation. The gallery reacted. Soft gasps, shifting seats, a wave of electricity moving through the room. The camera zoomed in, catching the redness creeping into his cheeks. He licked his lips. People misunderstand legal documents all the time. It is not my fault if a client, Judy cut in sharply. She misunderstood nothing. You manipulated everything. Her words hit him harder than volume ever could. He winced, his shoulders sinking. The plaintiff looked down at her hands, her fingers loosening as the imbalance of power continued to tilt. For the first time, she allowed herself to breathe in the possibility of justice. The lawyer's desperation began to seep through the cracks of his voice. Your Honor, you're only seeing one side. This plaintiff... Judy leaned forward a fraction of an inch, and the entire room fell silent. Do not finish that sentence unless you intend to apologize. He froze. Words trapped behind clenched teeth. Pride clawed at his throat, but fear held it down. She continued, her voice cool and unwavering. Every email, every altered clause, every inconsistency points to a deliberate pattern. You cornered your client. Now the facts are cornering you. His chest rose and fell, breaths uneven. The plaintiff watched him, her posture slowly straightening, not out of triumph, but out of long-suppressed truth finally touching daylight. "Mr. Ralston," Judy said softly, the softness more dangerous than anger, "you are not losing control. You lost it the moment you chose deception over duty." A low murmur rippled across the gallery. Even the bailiff shifted, sensing the turning tide. Judy looked toward the clerk. "We will need testimony," she said. "Bring in the first witness." The lawyer's head snapped up. A witness? Now? His eyes darted to the side door, the one that had just clicked open. The silhouette stepping through was unmistakable. Because the witness was not just anyone, it was someone he knew, someone he never expected to see again, especially not here. The door eased open, and the figure stepped into the light. The lawyer's face drained instantly, recognition hitting him like a punch he never saw coming. Because the woman walking toward the stand knew his tactics better than anyone. Her heels clicked softly against the courtroom floor, each step measured, controlled. She carried a calmness that felt earned, not performed. The gallery shifted, heads tilting, whispers forming and dying all at once as she took her seat. The plaintiff's eyes widened, not in fear, but in the quiet shock of seeing someone else who had clearly lived the same story. Judy watched the lawyer pale before she even addressed the witness. "State your name for the record." "Melissa Carter," she said, her voice steady as polished glass. The name landed like a verdict on the lawyer's shoulders. His hand shot to his collar, loosening a tie suddenly too tight. Melissa glanced at him only briefly, long enough to confirm he knew exactly why she was here and exactly what she intended to say. Judy folded her hands. "Ms. Carter, do you have prior professional experience with Mr. Ralston?" Melissa inhaled slowly. "Yes, he represented me 2 years ago." A wave of energy spread through the gallery, the quiet electric kind that signals a storm approaching. "And did a contract dispute occur during your representation?" "Yes," she said, eyes locking onto Judy's. "A dispute almost identical to the plaintiff's." The lawyer surged forward. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant." Judy didn't look at him. "Sit down." 2 words, ice cold, unmovable. He obeyed. Melissa continued, her voice deepening with long-suppressed truth. "Mr. Ralston pressured me to sign an agreement I hadn't fully read. He said delays would jeopardize the opportunity. I later discovered clauses I never approved. When I questioned him, he blamed my memory." The plaintiff swallowed hard. The experience mirrored her own with eerie precision. Judy nodded. "Do you have documentation to support your statements?" "I do." She reached into her bag and pulled out a neatly organized folder, but she didn't hand it over yet. She held it, letting the anticipation settle before adding, "And I brought something else." The lawyer stiffened. A bead of sweat slid down his temple. Judy's eyes narrowed. "What is that?" Melissa's voice softened, but not with pity, with certainty. "A recording of one of our meetings. He didn't know I was documenting things at the time." The courtroom erupted into a murmur. Even the bailiff blinked in surprise. The lawyer's breath stuttered, his fingers clutching the table as though bracing for collapse. "A recording?" Judy repeated, leaning in like a hunter catching scent. "And does this recording relate to the disputed clauses?" Melissa nodded once. "Directly." Judy extended her hand. "Let me hear it." Melissa placed a small flash drive onto the bench, a tiny object that suddenly felt heavier than every lie spoken today. The lawyer lunged from his seat. "Your Honor, this is prejudicial. This is—" "Quiet!" Judy snapped, the single word slicing through the air. The bailiff plugged the drive into the courtroom system. The speakers crackled. The gallery went silent. The lawyer's eyes closed as though he already knew what was coming. A voice filled the room, his voice, calm, confident, unmistakably deliberate. "Add the clause after she signs. She won't notice." The recording had begun, and his downfall had too. The lawyer's voice poured from the speakers, Smooth, calculated, dripping with the confidence of a man who believed no one would ever hear him say these things. Every syllable struck the courtroom like a dropped gavel, and the room, once buzzing with anticipation, fell into an almost reverent silence. Add the clause after she signs. She won't notice. The words hung in the air, echoing through the courtroom with the cold precision of a confession. The gallery froze, heads tilting as if straining to confirm the voice belonged to the man sitting 10 feet from the bench. He shifted in his seat, face flushing, fingers clutching the edge of the table so tightly the skin whitened. His eyes darted toward Melissa, a mixture of fury and panic, but she did not look back. She kept her gaze forward, steady, unflinching. The recording continued. If she pushes back, tell her the timeline will change. Clients don't read the fine print. They rely on us to translate. Use that. A gasp broke through the gallery, sharp, involuntary, human. Even the bailiff, trained to show no reaction, blinked in disbelief. A trembling hand to her mouth, her heartbeat visible in the hollow of her throat. Judy didn't flinch. She listened with the stillness of a judge who had heard every kind of deception, but rarely one spoken so proudly. On the recording, the lawyer chuckled. "Trust me, she'll fold. Just like the last one." The plaintiff closed her eyes, breath shuddering. Melissa's hands tightened in her lap. The room felt smaller now, the walls pressing in as if the courthouse itself recoiled at the sound of those words. The lawyer rose suddenly, voice strained. "Your Honor, this recording is taken wildly out of context. Judy raised one hand, a quiet command that sliced through his protest. "Sit." He obeyed. The room exhaled as he sank back into his chair, shoulders collapsing inward. The audio continued only a few more seconds, but it did not need more. Every lie he told, every attempt to deflect blame, every smear against his own clients, it all unraveled with ruthless clarity. Then the recording clicked off. Silence. A hard, unbearable kind of silence. The lawyer stared at the desk, breathing fast, chest rising in jerky movements. His smirk, his posturing, his polished confidence, all of it had vaporized. What remained was a man trying to outrun the echo of his own voice. Judy folded her hands, the quiet scraping of her chair the only sound in the room. "Mr. Ralston," she said, voice low and controlled, "this recording directly contradicts every statement you have made today." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing violently. "Your Honor, I—" "Do not," she said, cutting him off with a single glance. "Lie again." The plaintiff watched him, eyes glistening, not with triumph, but with disbelief that justice was finally pulling her truth into the light. Judy turned back to Melissa. "Ms. Carter, is there more?" Melissa nodded. "Yes, a second recording, and this one addresses the very clause he inserted into the plaintiff's contract." A ripple of shock moved through the room. The bailiff reached for the flash drive, slotting it into the system as the lawyer buried his face in his hands. Because everyone understood what came next, the truth was about to get louder. Do you believe remorse should ever erase guilt? Or does justice demand accountability no matter what? The audio system clicked softly as the second file queued up, a sound small enough to miss, yet heavy enough to shift the entire room's gravity. The lawyer's head snapped up, eyes wide, as if the darkness between those two clicks held every secret he prayed would stay buried. But Melissa had not come to leave anything buried. The second recording began with the low hum of an office, papers shuffling, a distant phone ringing. Then his voice emerged again, calmer this time, and more dangerous because of it. "Draft the modified version tonight," he said. "We'll keep the clean copy for the client. The other one is for enforcement." A collective inhale rippled through the gallery. The plaintiff clasped her hands together so tightly her knuckles blanched. Melissa sat upright, her posture resolute, but her jaw tightened with each word, each memory. On the recording, he continued. "She trusts me. They all do. Just change the clause numbers. She won't know what they were before." The plaintiff covered her mouth. A soft, choked sound escaped her, not a sob, but something deeper, the sound of months of self-blame dissolving in an instant. Judge Judy's expression didn't waver. Her stillness was colder than anger. It was the silence of a judge who had just received proof of a pattern, not an accident. The lawyer stumbled to his feet. "Your Honor, this is selective editing. She manipulated the file." Judy didn't even look at him. "Sit down." The command hit like a gavel strike. He fell back into his seat, breathing hard, as if gravity itself had doubled. The recording played on. "Clients never read the fine print. That's why it's called fine print. It's leverage. Use it." A woman in the gallery whispered, "Oh my God." Someone else shook their head slowly, disbelief settling in thick layers. Melissa's voice entered the recording, timid, uncertain, younger. "Isn't that unethical?" His recorded reply was immediate, confident, amused. "Ethical doesn't win cases. Control does." The sound ended with a soft click, final and merciless. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Even the bailiff, trained to neutrality, stared forward with a tight jaw. Judy's voice emerged low, nearly a whisper, the kind that makes every person strain to hear because they know a storm sits behind it. "Mr. Ralston," she said, "2 clients, 2 contracts, 2 patterns of altered terms. This is not a misunderstanding. This is a method." He shook his head violently. No, it's not like that." "Then explain it," Judy said, leaning forward, eyes narrowing. "Explain how 2 different women describe identical tactics. Explain how your own voice outlines your strategy." His mouth opened, but all that came out was a thin, pathetic breath. The plaintiff stared at him, not in hatred, but in the heartbreak of someone finally understanding they had been prey to a practiced predator. Judy exhaled slowly, a sigh heavy with disappointment rather than anger. "This goes beyond today's hearing," she said. "This reflects a pattern that demands accountability." Then she turned to Melissa. "Ms. Carter, do you have anything else the court should hear?" Melissa hesitated, then reached into her bag once more. The lawyer's heart nearly stopped. She pulled out a small notebook. "I have records," she said softly, "of every conversation he told me to forget." The courtroom erupted. The notebook rested in Melissa's hands like a relic pulled from the wreckage of a long-buried truth. The lawyer stared at it with a horror that did not belong to an innocent man. And suddenly, the courtroom's fluorescent lights felt too bright, as if exposing every corner he'd tried to keep dark. Judge Judy gestured gently. "Ms. Carter, please approach." Melissa stepped forward, her movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. When she handed Judy the notebook, the lawyer flinched, shoulders tightening as though each page carried a piece of his undoing. Judy flipped it open. The handwriting inside was precise. Dates, times, summaries of conversations, direct quotes. It was not the frantic scribbling of someone seeking revenge. It was methodical documentation created by someone who suspected, even then, that she might one day need protection. Judy read a passage aloud. "Client expresses discomfort with added clauses. Attorney instructs me to remind her she already agreed verbally." Another. "Concern raised about timeline changes. Attorney responds, she won't remember what the original said." The plaintiff's eyes filled. Her hand covered her mouth as the realization washed over her. She had not been naive. She had been targeted. The lawyer sank back in his chair, his composure fully shattered. He no longer smoothed his tie or straightened his papers. His hand sat limp on the table, palms up like he had finally run out of places to hide. "Ms. Carter," Judy said softly, "why did you keep these notes?" Melissa swallowed. "Because he made me feel like I was losing my mind. I needed proof of what he said. Proof for myself first, and maybe for someone else someday." The lawyer shook his head, voice cracking. "This is unfair. You're twisting everything I've ever said." Judy's gaze snapped toward him. "No. What's unfair is the repeated, documented pattern of coercion and deceit you inflicted on clients who trusted you." He deflated, chest collapsing inward. Judy closed the notebook gently, almost reverently, as though acknowledging the courage it took to write it. "Mr. Ralston," she said, voice solemn, "this is not a misunderstanding. This is a system you built. a blueprint you repeated. His eyes burned with a strange, broken mixture of fear and resignation. He opened his mouth, then stopped, swallowing hard. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he whispered. "Didn't mean for what to go this far?" Judy pressed. He looked up, and for the first time today, there was no arrogance left, just a man facing the truth of the person he became. "I learned these tactics at my first firm," he admitted. "They told me clients don't read. They told me efficiency mattered more than consent, and after a while, I stopped questioning it." His voice cracked. "I believed I was helping myself survive in this field." The plaintiff stared at him, not with pity, but with the clarity of someone finally seeing her abuser without his armor. Judy's voice dropped into something heavier, more profound. "Survival is not an excuse for exploitation. You chose to refine these tactics. You chose to use them." The courtroom stilled. A long, trembling silence followed. Then Judy sighed, not in frustration, but in sorrow. "Before today's hearing, I reviewed documents submitted from another jurisdiction involving your prior practice." The lawyer's head jerked up. Judy continued, her voice soft but devastating. "And the complaints in that file match these cases, almost word for word." A ripple of shock tore through the room. Judy leaned forward, eyes locking onto his. "Mr. Ralston, this isn't the first time, it's the third." The lawyer's breath left him in one shattering exhale because everything he'd tried to keep buried had just clawed its way into the light. The stack of complaints hit the bench with a sound that didn't echo. It thudded, heavy and final, like a verdict delivered before the ruling. The lawyer flinched at the noise, because he knew what lived inside those pages, the ghosts of his past, no longer silent. Judge Judy placed a hand on the topmost file, smoothing it with a gesture that felt almost ceremonial, not gentle, not cruel, just final. The room leaned closer, breath held, as though every spectator understood the significance. This wasn't evidence anymore. This was pattern. This was a legacy he'd hoped would stay buried under years of polished smiles and legal jargon. 3 prior complaints, Judy said, her voice low and controlled, all involving contract alterations, all involving pressured timelines, all describing tactics nearly identical to what we have seen here today. The plaintiff looked down at her lap, her fingers trembling, not from fear now, but from the dawning weight of knowing she had never been alone. Melissa watched, silently, shoulders softening with relief that her truth had not been dismissed as paranoia. The lawyer sat slumped, elbows weakly propped on the table, his hands covering half his face. He looked nothing like the confident, smirking professional who strutted into the courtroom hours earlier. Now he looked like a man meeting every version of himself he had tried to outrun. Judy continued flipping through the complaints. Each page turned with the slow inevitability of a clock striking midnight. "In this case," she said, "the plaintiff was led to believe she was signing a standard agreement. The same language appears in this complaint." She lifted the first file. "And this one." She tapped the second. "And this." He closed his eyes. A soft, strangled sound escaped him. Not quite a sob, not quite a gasp. Something frail, something collapsing. "Your Honor," he whispered, voice hoarse. "I was young then. That firm, it pushed us. It taught us shortcuts, pressured results." Judy held up a hand. His words fell into silence before they reached her bench. "That firm did not write your emails," she said calmly. "They did not alter your client's contract. They did not tell you to add a clause after she signed. You made those choices." He shook his head weakly. I know I did. I didn't think anyone would understand." Melissa spoke softly from her seat. "We understand too well." Her voice carried the weight of 2 years' worth of unresolved harm. The plaintiff nodded through tears, silently echoing her. Judy rested her elbows on the bench, folding her hands. The lighting above cast a solemn glow across her face, not harsh judgment, but moral disappointment. "You built a career," she said quietly, "on the assumption that your clients would remain silent, but silence is not the same as consent. And trust," she added, eyes locking onto his, "is not a resource for you to deplete at convenience." He looked down, shoulders shaking, not dramatically, but in the small, involuntary tremors of someone finally understanding the scale of their own actions. Judy closed the folder. The sound was soft, yet it rippled through the courtroom like a final breath being released. "I am preparing my ruling," she said. His head shot up. The entire room shifted. "But before I do," Judy continued, her expression sharpening, "there is one more matter we must address, one that affects far more than this case." The lawyer's pulse visibly jumped in his neck, because whatever came next would be bigger than damages or contracts. It would determine the fate of his entire career. The courtroom felt colder when Judy closed the final complaint file. Not hostile, not dramatic, just cold. The kind of cold that settles in when truth no longer needs to raise its voice. Judge Judy straightened the stack of papers before her, aligning the corners with deliberate care. It was a small gesture, but symbolic, like she was organizing the truth into something sharp enough to cut through the last of his defenses. The lawyer watched her hands move, each motion tightening the knot in his throat. "Mr. Ralston," Judy began, her voice low but resonant, "I am issuing my ruling." The plaintiff inhaled sharply. Melissa shifted forward. The gallery leaned in as though drawn by gravity itself. Judy continued. "First, the plaintiff's contract is hereby deemed unenforceable. The altered version you provided to this court carries no legal weight." The plaintiff let out a soft, tearful exhale. Relief, disbelief, and gratitude blending into a trembling breath. Her shoulders lifted as if a boulder she'd carried for months finally rolled away. Judy wasn't done. "In addition," she said, "you will reimburse the plaintiff for financial losses she suffered due to your manipulative tactics, as well as for the emotional distress you inflicted by presenting a fraudulent document as legitimate." The lawyer closed his eyes, face folding inward. His hands, once busy correcting imaginary creases or straightening his tie, now lay motionless on the desk. Every ounce of arrogance he had brought into this courtroom had evaporated, replaced by something hollow and unsteady. Judy turned the pages slowly, her tone tightening. These emails, recordings, and witness testimony demonstrate not only deception, but a pattern, one that violates the ethical standards of your profession. A wave of murmurs swept across the gallery. He swallowed hard, his voice cracking when he tried to respond. "Your Honor, I never meant to hurt anyone. Intent," Judy interrupted, "does not erase impact, and excuses do not erase harm." The plaintiff wiped tears from her cheeks, watching him with a quiet resilience. Melissa, steady as stone, sat beside her. A living reminder that his misconduct was not isolated, not accidental, not survivable by apology. Judy folded her hands. The lighting above cast a grave glow on the bench. "Given the evidence," she said, "I will be forwarding this entire case file, including the recordings and the prior complaints, to the state bar for a full review." A sharp inhale cut across the room. The lawyer's head jerked up, panic widening his eyes. "This may result," Judy continued, "in disciplinary action, suspension, or even the revocation of your license to practice law." His breath stuttered. He gripped the table as though it could keep him from slipping into the void opening beneath him. The courtroom sat suspended between shock and inevitability. The plaintiff watched him without malice, simply witnessing the fall of the man who had once towered over her life. Judy leaned back, studying him with a heavy, penetrating quiet. "Before I finalize this ruling, Mr. Ralston," she said, "you may address the court, if you have anything you wish to say." The room shifted again, tense, waiting, braced. The lawyer rose slowly, hands shaking, lips parting as he struggled for words. And when he finally spoke, his voice sounded nothing like the man who entered this courtroom. It sounded like someone standing on the ruins of his own making. He stood slowly, every movement stiff, as though guilt itself had crystallized around his joints. The lawyer who once strutted into the courtroom now looked like a man trying to stay upright in a storm of his own creation. And when he opened his mouth, the voice that emerged was barely there, thin, cracking, human. He cleared his throat, staring down at the table as if he couldn't bear to meet the eyes around him. I don't know where to begin." The gallery remained still. Even the cameras seemed to quiet, their hum fading into the background as the courtroom braced itself. He inhaled shakily. "Your Honor, when I started practicing law, I wanted to be someone people respected, someone who knew how to win." His voice wavered. "But somewhere along the way, I learned to cut corners. I learned it from the people I admired, and then I started believing that shortcuts were the same thing as skill." Judy watched him with a level, unreadable expression, not encouraging, not condemning, simply listening. He tried to continue, but his breath hitched. He pressed a hand to his forehead, dragging it down his face, revealing eyes rimmed red. "I told myself clients wouldn't understand the details, that they didn't care, that it was harmless, that I was helping them by handling things myself." Melissa's gaze hardened. The plaintiff's eyes filled again, not with sympathy, but with the ache of hearing the confession she had once begged him to acknowledge. He turned toward the plaintiff, voice trembling. "You trusted me, I knew that. And He swallowed hard, his next words splitting apart. "I used that trust because it was easier than being honest." His shoulders sagged under the weight of what he had admitted. "I was wrong. I know that isn't enough. I know I can't fix what you went through. I can't undo it." For a moment he looked like he might crumble right there, a man standing on ground that could no longer hold him. Judy spoke softly, carefully. "Is there anything else, Mr. Ralston?" He hesitated, then nodded. "When you said the bar might review my license..." His voice broke. "I deserve that. Whatever comes next, I deserve it." The gallery shifted. No gasps, no murmurs. Just the quiet, heavy realization that the arrogant man who walked in had finally cracked open, revealing not innocence, not redemption, but the truth of a flawed human being staring into the mirror for the first time. The plaintiff wiped her cheek, not forgiving, not softening, simply absorbing the weight of his downfall with the dignity he never gave her. Judy closed her eyes briefly, as if honoring the gravity of what had been said, then lifted the original contract one final time. The page that started everything. Its edges no longer looked sharp. They looked conclusive. "Mr. Ralston," Judy said, voice firming into the tone of final judgment, "I am now ready to deliver my ruling." The courtroom went silent, because everyone understood the next words would decide the rest of his career, and the story's justice. Before the verdict drops, tell me in the comments, can a person truly change, or do they just learn to hide their flaws better? The courtroom held its breath as Judge Judy lifted the original contract, the unaltered truth that had survived his lies, his edits, his manipulations. The lawyer stared at it like a man facing his final mirror, and Judy's voice carried the quiet certainty of someone about to lay down the kind of justice that leaves no loose ends. "Mr. Ralston," she began, the courtroom falling into a deep, motionless silence, "this court finds that the plaintiff entered into her agreement under false pretenses created by you." Her gaze slid toward the plaintiff, warm yet firm. "The original contract stands as the only valid document. You owe her restitution, financial reimbursement, and damages for the distress your deception caused." The plaintiff's breath trembled. Months of fear, self-doubt, and powerless frustration finally gave way to something gentler, relief. Genuine, fragile relief. Melissa touched her arm softly, a silent confirmation that truth had finally, unquestionably, prevailed. Judy turned back to the lawyer. "You also knowingly presented a falsified contract to this court. You pressured your client into signing without informed consent, and you attempted to weaponize legal language to trap someone who trusted you." Each statement fell like a stone into still water, rippling deeper than the courtroom's walls. He swallowed, head bowed, face pale beneath the harsh overhead lights. "Therefore," Judy continued, "this matter is being referred to the state bar for disciplinary review. Given the evidence, your prior complaints, and the pattern of misconduct demonstrated today," she paused, not for suspense, but for gravity, "I would not be surprised if they recommend suspension or disbarment." The lawyer's knees buckled slightly. He grabbed the edge of the table, The last physical thing anchoring him to the career he'd spent years building and quietly destroying. Judy's tone softened, but it was not sympathy. It was truth delivered without cruelty. Mr. Ralston, arrogance is loud. Accountability is quiet. Today the quiet part finally arrived. He nodded weakly, tears gathering but never falling. His voice caught in his throat. I understand. The plaintiff looked at him, not vengeful, not triumphant, just resolute. She had walked in terrified of him. She walked out no longer haunted. Judy closed the original contract and set it aside with a finality that seemed to shift the room's air. This hearing is concluded. The gavel struck once, firm and echoing, a sound that felt like a chapter closing. The gallery exhaled, reporters scribbled, Melissa gathered her things. The plaintiff let her shoulders fall, as if finally stepping out from under a shadow she didn't realize had stretched so far. The lawyer remained seated long after the cameras stopped rolling, a lone figure in a room where his confidence once filled the air like smoke. Now only the truth remained. Judy rose from the bench, offering one final look toward the courtroom. Not at the plaintiff, not at the lawyer, but at everyone watching. And in that look was the unspoken moral of the entire story. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits, then it arrives, and arrogance crumbles beneath it.